To 1437 local time, Southern Caribbean Sea, international waters. From the outside, nothing looked unusual. The ocean was calm, almost glassy, broken only by long, slow swells rolling in from the east. Visibility was excellent. The sky was clear. No storms on the horizon. Conditions like this are considered ideal for routine carrier operations, clean radar returns, stable flight conditions, predictable surface traffic. At the center of it all, the USS George Washington maintained steady course and speed, conducting a scheduled transit as part of a routine forward presence mission. For the sailors topside, it was another normal watch. Aircraft were secured on deck. Escorts held their stations. Radios remained quiet. Inside the ship, the mood was the same. Until it wasn't. In the Combat Information Center, a radar operator leaned forward slightly in his chair. His screen had just changed. "New surface contacts," he called out, voice flat, professional. "Multiple returns. Bearing 210. The large tactical display began to populate with symbols. Not one, not two, six. 6 surface contacts appeared almost simultaneously along the outer edge of the radar picture. Their spacing was tight. Their speed was consistent. And none of them were broadcasting AIS identification signals. That immediately ruled out normal commercial traffic. The CIC supervisor stepped closer to the display. Range markers updated. Bearings stabilized. The contacts were real, solid, and moving with intent. "Classify," came the order. Electro-optical systems slewed automatically. Long-range cameras zoomed in, pulling faint silhouettes out of the Caribbean haze. Narrow hulls, low profiles, military lines, Venezuelan Navy warships. 6 of them. What caught the crew's attention wasn't just their presence, it was their geometry. The ships weren't transiting on parallel courses, they weren't scattered. They were maneuvering in a pattern that made sense only when viewed together. A deliberate formation. "Contacts are adjusting course," the radar operator reported seconds later. "Speed increasing, all 6. On the bridge, the officer of the deck received the update without comment. No alarms were sounded, no sudden maneuvers ordered. The carrier held course. Standard procedure. Bridge-to-bridge hails were transmitted on open maritime frequencies, first in English, then repeated in Spanish. No response. The silence mattered. In naval operations, ignoring hails isn't an accident. It's a choice. Inside the CIC, every movement was now being logged. Timestamps, course changes, speed adjustments, radar emissions. Nothing dramatic, nothing emotional, just data. The closest point of approach calculations began updating in real time. At their current headings, the Venezuelan ships would close the distance steadily over the next several minutes. Not dangerously, yet, but close enough to make a point. This was not an attack posture. There were no fire control radars lighting up, no missile hatches opening, no sudden acceleration spikes that would indicate a prelude to kinetic action. This was something else. A gray zone maneuver. Pressure without contact. Presence without gunfire. From the Venezuelan perspective, 6 warships approaching a U.S. carrier sends a message without crossing a red line. From the American perspective, it triggers a different response. Discipline, documentation, and control. The escorts adjusted subtly, tightening their screen around the carrier without altering the overall formation. Everything was measured. Everything was calm. On the flight deck, no one was running. Below deck, no one was shouting. The carrier strike group had trained for this exact scenario hundreds of times. The real story wasn't what was happening on the surface, it was what hadn't happened yet. 6 Venezuelan warships were closing in. The USS George Washington was holding steady, and in the next few minutes, every decision by both sides would matter. 1441 local time. 4 minutes after initial detection, the picture had fully developed. All 6 Venezuelan warships were now clearly established on radar and visual sensors, their headings no longer parallel, no longer coincidental. Each vessel was adjusting course in small, deliberate increments, 2 to port, 1 to starboard, others holding steady, creating a widening arc ahead of the carrier's projected track. This was not random maneuvering. In the Combat Information Center aboard USS George Washington, the geometry was unmistakable. The contacts were shaping the battle space without crossing into hostile action. No single ship was threatening on its own. Together, they were forming pressure. Formation suggests coordinated movement, the CIC watch officer noted. Multiple CPA trends decreasing. Closest point of approach calculations refreshed every few seconds. None were yet inside unsafe margins, but the trend line was clear. The Venezuelan ships were not shadowing, they were positioning. On the bridge, the captain observed without comment. The carrier maintained steady speed. No turns, no acceleration, no visible reaction. That restraint was deliberate. In naval doctrine, the first visible move often becomes the narrative. The United States Navy trains its crews to deny that narrative space. By holding course, the carrier forced the situation to remain what it was, a maneuver, not an incident. Bridge-to-bridge hails were transmitted again. No reply. The escorts, guided missile destroyers operating as part of the carrier strike group, began subtle adjustments, not aggressive, not sudden, just enough to maintain layered spacing around the carrier while preserving freedom of movement. To an untrained eye, nothing changed. To anyone watching closely, everything had. Inside the CIC, sensors were now fully engaged. Surface search radar tracked hull movement. Electronic support measures logged emissions. Long-range optics fed continuous imagery into recording systems. Every bearing change was time-stamped. Every speed adjustment archived. This wasn't about reacting. It was about building a record. At 1444, one Venezuelan ship increased speed by 3 knots. Another followed 30 seconds later. The formation tightened slightly, compressing the arc ahead of the carrier's bow. CPA trending lower on contacts 3 and 4, came the update. Still outside safety limits. No alarms sounded. The absence of escalation was itself the escalation. From the Venezuelan side, the message was clear. We are here, we are coordinated, and we are close. From the American side, the response was equally clear. We see you, we are calm, and we are documenting everything. This is how gray zone encounters unfold, not with weapons, but with posture. The carrier's flight deck remained quiet. Aircraft stayed secured. No visible launch preparations. No dramatic shows of force. Below deck, however, readiness was rising. Not emotionally, but procedurally. Rules of engagement were reviewed. Non-lethal response options were queued. Air assets were brought to a higher state of availability, though not yet airborne. Everything remained one step short of overt escalation. At 1447, the Venezuelan formation reached its tightest geometry so far. 6 ships, 1 carrier, distance closing. Still no radio response. Still no targeting radar. Still no shots fired. In situations like this, The most dangerous assumption is that nothing will change. That's why the Navy trains for patience under pressure. The crew aboard the George Washington had no need to rush. Time favored the side that stayed disciplined. The carrier continued on course, a floating city of steel and procedure, refusing to be drawn into theatrics. And then, quietly, the calculus shifted. Because pressure only works if it forces a reaction. And the reaction that was coming wouldn't involve missiles, warnings, or speed. It would involve something far more decisive. Eyes in the air, 14:49 local time. The order did not come with urgency, and it did not come with drama. Launch the helicopter. On the flight deck of the USS George Washington, deck crews moved with practiced efficiency. No alarms, no running. Just a controlled shift from routine posture to operational presence. Within minutes, the MH-60 Seahawk was brought to life, rotors cutting clean arcs through the humid Caribbean air. This was not a show of force. It was a signal of awareness. As the helicopter lifted off, the carrier did not change course. The escorts did not surge forward. The Venezuelan ships continued their approach pattern, holding speed, maintaining formation. No sudden moves from either side. The Seahawk climbed to a modest altitude and settled into a wide offset from the carrier's track, staying deliberately clear of any overflight that could be interpreted as provocative. Its mission was simple: extend the sensor horizon, confirm intent, and apply non-lethal pressure. Inside the helicopter, systems came online in sequence. Forward-looking infrared, electro-optical zoom, surface tracking. Everything fed live back to the carrier's Combat Information Center, where the tactical picture sharpened by the second. 6 Venezuelan hulls filled the screens. From the air, the pattern was unmistakable. The ships were not drifting. They were maneuvering with intent. Small course corrections, synchronized speed changes, disciplined spacing. Professional sailors executing a calculated message. The Seahawk's crew logged it all. At 14:52, the helicopter reached its assigned position, a beam of the Venezuelan formation, still outside any unsafe distance. Its presence was visible. Its markings were clear. Its sensors were unmistakably active. Still, no radio response from the Venezuelan ships. Inside the CIC, analysts compared live imagery with radar tracks. Everything matched. No weapons manned, no missile doors open, no fire control radar emissions detected. This was pressure, not preparation. But pressure cuts both ways. The Seahawk initiated a slow, deliberate orbit, not aggressive, not hurried, just enough to ensure every ship's bridge crew could see it and understand what it represented. At 14:54, a green laser designator flickered briefly, steady and controlled, landing on the bridge structure of the lead Venezuelan ship. Non-lethal, non-damaging, impossible to ignore. The message required no translation. We see you. We are recording. Your actions are documented. The helicopter's sensor operator tightened the zoom. Deck activity on the Venezuelan ship changed subtly. Personnel shifted positions. One figure raised binoculars. Another moved aft, away from the forward gun mount. Small movements, meaningful ones. Back aboard the carrier, the log continued to fill. Timestamps, visual confirmation, laser usage recorded. No deviation from rules of engagement. At 14:56, the first measurable change appeared. One Venezuelan ship reduced speed by 2 knots. Another followed less than a minute later. The formation did not break, but it softened. The tight arc ahead of the carrier widened slightly. closest point of approach calculations began trending upward. No announcements were made on the bridge. No acknowledgments over the radio. The carrier held course. The Seahawk maintained its orbit, calm and unhurried, its presence doing exactly what it was designed to do: apply pressure without escalation. This was not about dominance. It was about control. In modern naval encounters, the side that fires first often loses the narrative. The side that documents, records, and maintains discipline usually wins it. At 1459, the Venezuelan formation eased further. Headings shifted by a few degrees. Nothing dramatic, nothing public. Just enough to signal a decision. The helicopter did not pursue. It did not close distance. It simply stayed visible. Sensors running. Proof preserved. The carrier strike group remained steady, unprovoked, unmoved. The encirclement had not ended yet, but its momentum had. 1502 local time. The change didn't come all at once. It came in increments, measured, cautious, unmistakable to anyone trained to read movement at sea. The first Venezuelan warship altered course by less than 5 degrees, barely perceptible to the naked eye. On radar, it was obvious. The second followed shortly after, easing its bow away from the carrier's projected track. Speed came down by another knot, then another. Inside the Combat Information Center, the CPA calculations updated again. This time, the trend line moved the other direction. CPA increasing, the watch officer reported. Formation loosening. No one cheered. No one spoke out of turn. This wasn't a victory moment, it was a confirmation. The pressure phase was ending. Above the water, the MH-60 Seahawk adjusted its orbit slightly, widening the circle rather than tightening it. The helicopter did not advance. It did not signal again. Its job was already done. Presence had been established. Documentation was complete. On the Venezuelan ships, deck activity continued to shift. Personnel moved away from exposed positions. The forward gun crews were no longer visible. The ships maintained formation, but the intent had changed. What had been an approach was now a shadow. At 1506, the first radio transmission finally came through. United States naval vessel, this is Venezuelan Navy patrol unit conducting sovereign operations in proximity to national waters. The language was deliberate, non-confrontational, carefully framed. The reply from the carrier strike group was equally measured. Venezuelan naval vessel, this is a United States Navy warship conducting lawful operations in international waters. Your movements are being recorded. Maintain safe distance. No raised voices, no warnings, no threats. Just facts. After that exchange, the radios went quiet again, but the ships kept drifting apart. One by one, the Venezuelan warships adjusted, heading just enough to remove themselves from the encirclement geometry. The arc dissolved into a loose line. CPA margins widened to clearly safe distances. The carrier never changed course. That was the point. In naval operations, restraint is not passive. It is active control of tempo. By refusing to react emotionally or tactically, the carrier strike group denied the encounter the escalation it needed to continue. Inside the CIC, analysts reviewed the full sequence in real time. Radar tracks overlaid with optical footage. Laser designation logs synced with timestamps. Radio silence annotated. Every data point preserved. This wasn't just situational awareness. It was evidentiary awareness. At 1511, the Seahawk received clearance to disengage. The helicopter climbed gradually, broke its orbit, and turned back toward the carrier. No abrupt departure. No dramatic exit. Just a smooth withdrawal, signaling that the interaction had concluded. The Venezuelan ships did not pursue. They didn't need to. The message had already landed. By 1515, the formation had fully relaxed. All 6 warships remained visible on radar, but none were maneuvering aggressively. Speeds normalized. Headings stabilized. The encounter had transitioned from confrontation to coexistence. On the bridge of the carrier, watches continued uninterrupted. On the flight deck, routine operations resumed. Below deck, logs were finalized, cross-checked, and secured. There were no headlines being written yet, no statements prepared, no press briefings queued. And that was intentional. Because from the Navy's perspective, this wasn't about making noise. It was about making sure that if questions came later about who moved first, who pressured whom, who stayed within the law, the answers would already exist. Recorded, verified, complete. 6 warships had closed in. 1 carrier had held steady. No shots fired, no warnings issued. Just disciplined presence, applied at the right moment. And in the silent language of naval power, that was enough. 15:18 local time. By then, the moment had passed. All 6 Venezuelan warships remained visible on radar, but the geometry that had defined the encounter was gone. Their headings no longer converged. Their speeds had normalized. The closest point of approach now sat comfortably outside any safety threshold. From the standpoint of the USS George Washington, the situation had resolved itself without escalation, without spectacle, and without deviation from international law. That outcome was not accidental. Inside the Combat Information Center, the shift from live monitoring to post-event review began almost immediately. Radar tracks were replayed. Optical footage was synchronized. Timestamps were checked against radio logs. Laser designation records were verified and archived. Nothing was left to interpretation. This is how modern naval encounters are closed, not with declarations, but with documentation. On the bridge, the watch rotated as scheduled. No change in posture, no celebratory remarks. The carrier continued on its original course, maintaining speed and heading exactly as planned hours earlier. That continuity mattered. Had the carrier altered course, even slightly, the encounter could have been framed differently. Had speed increased, it might have suggested alarm. Had aircraft launched aggressively, it could have been portrayed as provocation. Instead, none of that happened. The narrative remained anchored in facts. 6 Venezuelan warships approached. The U.S. carrier held steady. Non-lethal presence was established. The formation disengaged. That sequence is difficult to dispute when every step is recorded. From the Venezuelan side, there was no follow-up transmission, no complaint, no accusation. The ships continued operating in the region, now at a respectful distance, their movements once again consistent with routine patrol activity. The absence of reaction was itself an acknowledgement. In gray zone operations, success is often measured by what doesn't happen. No collision, no warning shots, no diplomatic fallout triggered by miscalculation. The line between presence and provocation remained intact. That line is thin. The Caribbean Sea has seen it crossed before, by many nations, often unintentionally. What keeps it intact is training, repetition under pressure, doctrine built around restraint, and commanders willing to trust procedure over impulse. For the sailors aboard the carrier, this encounter would not become a story told over and over. It would be logged, briefed, and filed. Another entry in a long list of moments where professionalism mattered more than firepower. That's the reality of forward naval presence. It isn't about winning confrontations. It's about preventing them from becoming something else. Later, analysts would examine why the Venezuelan ships chose to approach when they did. Domestic signaling, political messaging, response to earlier regional actions. All of that would be discussed quietly, far from the deck plates. But at sea, the mission stayed simple. Maintain freedom of navigation. Operate lawfully. Deter without escalating. By sunset, the encounter was already fading into routine traffic patterns. The carrier strike group moved on. The Venezuelan ships remained behind, their brief convergence reduced to a set of radar lines and recorded footage. No press release followed that day, because, from the Navy's perspective, nothing extraordinary had occurred. 6 warships closed in. The carrier did not flinch, and the situation resolved itself. In modern naval operations, that is often the clearest signal of all.